Well, I think the first thing when we start thinking about answering a question, first thing I would say is to keep in mind that we're answering the questioner and not the question. This can be particularly dangerous for any of us who are wired apologetically or theologically. We see a question coming and we get excited because now is the chance to download our answer. We know the answer to this one. But you can miss the fact that the person you're addressing, the question they presented with, is not the real issue. And so I always encourage people, the first thing when someone raises a question or objection to your faith, very first thing before anything else is to say something like, "That's a great question. Tell me, why do you ask it?" And you might get some of the story behind the question. And it may turn out that the question they're asking has nothing to do with the real issue. I had an example of this a few years ago. I taught a church youth group on the power of asking good questions, and I taught them this approach. And I got an email a couple of days later to say the very next day, one of the kids in that youth group, 13-year-old kid, had been in the school science class. And one of his classmates just sort of flippantly said, "Oh, what are you doing in a science lab? You're a Christian. Christians don't believe in science." And that kid, having listened to what I'd said in the class at the church, had turned to his friend and said, "Oh, that's really interesting. You might say that. Why do you say that? Why is that a question for you?" And that actually opened up a dialogue. And it turned out his classmate had just lost a close family friend in a road traffic accident, was furious at God, and just picked on the first Christian he'd come across. Result, nothing to do with science, all about suffering. So first thing, slow down. We're trying to answer the questioner, not so much the question. Second thing I would say is question the question. So when someone raises a question, interrogate it a little bit. If someone says there's no evidence that God exists, rather than sort of feel you have to download a 45-minute sermon onto them, what about beginning by saying, "Well, that's interesting. What do you mean by the word evidence? What would look like evidence for you? What would you need to see or hear to be persuaded there might be a God?" So interrogate the question a little bit. And last thing I would say is be prepared to say when you don't know. You can do great damage if someone asks a question about your faith and you wade in, you don't know what you're doing, you just go off on a random direction and they can see right through you. Far better to say, "That's a brilliant question. If that really matters to you, leave it with me and I will find you the answer." And go do that. Talk to an older, wiser Christian, talk to your pastor. One caveat to that, there are some questions that I think every Christian should have thought about. Obvious one, the problem of suffering. If your friend says to you, "How can you believe in a good God in a world of suffering?" and you say, "Oh, what an amazing question. I've never really thought about that." They're not going to conclude that you're humble. They're going to conclude you're an idiot. So there are some things that it's worth all of us having thought about so we can engage.